Greetings and welcome to the Introduction to Astronomy. In this week's Misconception in Astronomy, we are going to talk about the stars and find out if stars are visible from large cities. So, can we see stars visible in large cities? And yes, actually stars are visible even from the largest and brightest cities. However, there is a major problem here that is known as light pollution. And what that means is that the lights from the city will brighten the sky and make things less visible. So, what we see in the two images here off to the right, that is the constellation of Orion. The image on the left of here is from a dark area where we can see lots of different stars and very prominent bright stars of the constellation, but we can also see a lot of other stars. The other from a brighter area, not an inner city, but a relatively bright region, and you can see that lots of stars are no longer visible, and in fact you don't see the stars near as prominent. You have difficulty within a city. You can't take as long of an exposure because there's too much light around, and the stray light will wash things out. Whereas in a very dark area, as we see in the left, you can take a much longer exposure and bring out a lot of detail in things like the Orion Nebula visible there. So even though there is a light pollution, the brightest stars would still be visible even from a large city such as New York City. So what do we mean by light pollution itself? Well, it's really the stray light that brightens the sky and makes fainter stars harder to see, if not impossible. So here we see a different scale going from an excellent dark sky sight off here to the right-hand side, and you can see there you're seeing lots of detail in the Milky Way. As you move to the left, things get brighter and brighter until when you're in an inner city, very little, if anything, is visible. And it would really depend on which of the brighter stars are actually up above the horizon and able to be seen. So you can see that as you go out in the rural areas, lots of stars and even parts of the Milky Way are visible. When you go further in and you get into bright suburbs or in towards the cities, it's a lot harder to see anything. Essentially, the larger city tends to mean more light, which means fewer stars are going to be visible. And in fact, we have what we call the limiting magnitude, and that is going to be the faintest magnitude that is visible. Now, for a dark site, that's generally considered about 6th magnitude. There's some variation in it, but that is the typical historical number that is the brightest that can be seen with the unaided eye. And when you get to a very bright city, that might become 2. You might only see stars that are magnitude 2 or brighter. We have to remember, in the magnitude scale, smaller numbers mean a brighter star. So in central New York, maybe a dozen stars would be visible at any given time. And again, it's also very bright and there's a lot going on there. Your eyes are not adapted to the dark, so it's going to be even harder to see those. But if you can find the right place, even with all the bright lights of the city, a few stars would still remain visible, even in a large city like New York. And we could look at a map of that, and here we see where the worst light pollution is. And of course, you can tie it down to where the most industrialized areas are and the most people are. So as we start at the left-hand side, we can see parts of the United States. They're very bright, especially the very west coast and a lot of the eastern half of the country. Less down in South America. Certain areas around the very bright cities are, but you can note that the Amazon basin there, very, very dark. When we move over toward the east here, we can see Africa, the northern areas around the Mediterranean, very bright, and some cities around the coastal areas, but the interior, very, very dark skies. Europe, very bright. And as we work our way through, you can see things like India and China and Japan are also very bright skies, meaning that you're going to be able to see far fewer stars from those areas than you are from the very darkest areas. So let's go ahead and finish up with our summary. And what we've looked at today is that light pollution affects the number of stars that are going to be visible from any given location. But the very brightest stars are still visible even from larger cities. But our eyes are going to be overwhelmed by the bright lights around us, making it even harder to see those stars. So that concludes this week's Misconception in Astronomy on bright stars not being visible from a large city. We'll be back again next week for another Misconception in Astronomy. So until then, have a great day, everyone, and I will see you in class.